on. Hey YouTube, how we doing today? Unky Joe here, Unky Joe's Playhouse. And today is Monday. I know I should be working on the house and getting the repairs done, but we had about 2 inches of rain over the weekend, and it is a wet, sloggy mess outside. So I called and we're calling for more rain. So I called my contractor this morning and told him, let's not work today, let's work on Tuesday and Wednesday instead. So in the meantime, I'm left with a little bit of free time, so I thought I'd try to squeeze one more video in there, and I've had a lot of requests for this. So here's what we're going to be doing. As you can see, I'm currently downloading Windows Server 2016. Now, I was initially going to wait for this until I ordered my second Dell R710 server off of eBay. But the funds are not, it's not in the cards right now. The funds are just too tight, and I don't want to spend the $200 to order it. So I forgot that I had right behind me here, right there, this machine. It has an MSI motherboard in there and an AMD quad-core processor from about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I'll have the specs on that in just a minute. And so I thought, well, let's do this. We'll install Server 2016 on there, and then we'll set it up as a Hyper-V server, and then we'll use it to set up some virtual machines so I can show you how easy it is to do. So let me bring up the specifications on that system board. Well, first let me tell you what all's in that server. This was my primary Hyper-V server about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, something like that. I've since switched to the Dell R710, but before that I went ahead and purchased an Intel i5 board and processor, and that was running my Hyper-V server for my home office and my lab. This unit has got an MSI 785 GM-E65 motherboard in there with an with an AMD Athlon quad-core processor, or is it a Phenom? I can't remember. I'm using a basic Antec 450 watt power supply. It's got an old Western Digital Enterprise drive in there, 500 gig. It's only serial ATA2, but it's plenty fast enough. Has 16 gig of DDR3 Kingston HyperX RAM, and it's in an old Antec case. Let me bring up the motherboard site, and there's the motherboard I'm using. I don't use this was during my MSI period. I do not use MSI products anymore. Before this board, I had a client who had an MSI board with an AMD Athlon. I think it's the previous one to this motherboard. And here's what happened. Let me bring up this motherboard. You see this row of voltage regulator ICs? They blew. They blew on that other board, and the chip then got overvolted and blew the chip. So now normally MSI makes a really good motherboard, but in that case I did not have great success. Now I've got two of these boards because I had two Hyper-V servers. The other one only has 8 gig of RAM in it. This one has 16, so this is the one I'm going to be using. But let's just go over the specifications real quick. So it supports AMD Phenom 2 CPU, HyperTransport 3, yada yada. It's a 785G chipset and SB710. It's got DDR3 RAM in it, PCI Express slots, 5 serial ATA2 ports, 1 eSATA port on the outside, Realtek audio, and Realtek PCI Gigabit Ethernet card. And it supports a standard ATX power supply, 24-pin power supply. And here's the back plane on that. No USB 3 ports, but that's okay. I won't be needing them. One more thing about this AMD setup on this board. This unit is a power pig. If you look, I'm sorry, I should have had this prepared. Let me bring this up for you. I want you to see something on the motherboard. Look right here. 140 watt CPU ready. So this thing, when it's running, pulls about 120 watts. So you can equate that to a 100 watt light bulb. So this thing is pretty power hungry. AMD chips are not known for their low power use, but that's okay. It's only going to be running when needed, so I'm not real concerned about power consumption. But that's something you'd probably, if you're in an area where your cost per kilowatt hour is high, you may want to consider something else. But again, the whole reason I'm doing this is to show you it can be done on a budget with spare parts laying around. Even though Windows Server 2016 is brand new, you can do it. Don't let Microsoft scare you. You can pretty much run Microsoft products on anything. Now, I'm not going with ESXi. I'm not a big fan of VMware. I just think it's clunky and hard to use, and I'm a Microsoft guy. So you could run ESXi on this as well. The other thing you need to be aware of when running ESXi is it's very specific about network cards, and sometimes if the network card is not supported, you either have to buy a different network card for it. I happen to have an Intel 1 gigabit Ethernet adapter I'm going to pop in here as well, because I like having two or more Ethernet cards in my Hyper-V servers. Just gives you a little more flexibility. So I'll be putting that in there as well. But just be mindful, don't let Microsoft scare you. You can run it. I've ran a Server 2012 R2 on there for years. Never had any trouble with it at all. Plenty fast. It's not like this is going to be a workstation. I want to show you one more thing. What they say, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, I got that Movo condenser mic to replace that one that I had before, that Soul Bay or whatever it was microphone. I'm quite happy with it. I did have a little trouble getting the levels set. So you notice on my previous video, my vlog video, the audio was kind of all over the place. And I apologize for that. I've since learned how to adjust it. But I just want to show you my microphone stand, because I find when I clip the lapel mic to my shirt here, it doesn't pick up as well as it could. So what I did was, look at this. I don't know that you can see it. This is a ruler, okay? This is just a pink ruler, and I clipped the microphone onto the ruler, and then I embedded the ruler into the slot here on the desk. And see that long cord I showed you when I did the review on the mic? Yeah, that's necessity is the mother of invention. So there you go. That's what I'm using for a mic stand. And let me slap the desk. Not too bad, huh? So I just got to remember not to slam my hands on the desk. But anyway, that's what I'm using for a microphone stand. Okay, so Server 2016 is now finished downloading. So I'm bringing out my handy-dandy Kingston 8 gig USB 2 thumb drive, and I'm going to use Rufus to create a Windows Server 2016 installation USB key. So let me switch over to my monitor, and we'll keep the webcam in there. Let's just do the monitor. So I've got Rufus up and running, so let's plug in the USB key. And there we go. We now have it plugged in. I am going to now choose the image I'm going to write to this, and it's in my downloads folders. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to come right here and select an image. It's under my downloads, and it should be right here. And I'm going to tell it to open. And it's going to create, let's see here, do NTFS, master boot record for BIOS or UEFI. It's going to quick format it, it's going to create it, it's not going to use image to go, and it's going to give it a new volume label, and I'm going to call this new volume Server 2016. Alright, so I've got my ISO in there, I've got my USB key, and I'm going to start. And it's warning me it's going to erase everything on there. So this is going to take a little bit of time, and we will come back when it is done. Okay, so here we are half an hour later, and Rufus has completed, and you can see it took 30 minutes and 11 seconds. So let's go ahead and we'll close Rufus, and we'll eject the key, the USB key, and we'll move over to the machine here at the other desk, and you see I've got my camera already set up, and we'll move forward on the install. So here is the unit we're going to be installing it on, the MSI board, the AMD processor, the 16 gig of RAM. I've got a Seagate, I'm sorry, a Western Digital Enterprise drive in here. I'm also going to install this Intel Pro 1000 GT desktop adapter. It will work with Windows Server 2016, I believe. I put that in because I like having more than one video card. I'm sorry, more than one network card in my Hyper-V servers, just in case I want to do some subnetting or that kind of thing. I have a different network set up for my primary LAN. So I'll be installing this into one of these two PCI slots, probably the bottom one here. In fact, let's just put that in right now. And then we'll get a screw to put into it. So here's the unit we're going to be using. As soon as the USB key is done, I'll be plugging it in place of my Hackintosh setup. And then I'll concentrate on the monitor. I'm not going to worry about putting slot covers and that kind of thing in this right now because it's going to be just a test system. Everything else is hooked up and ready to go. So we'll get started here in just a minute. Booted up the machine, brought up the BIOS, and I want to go into it. Let's go down to system information so we can see. Okay, so it's an AMD Athlon 2 X4 635 processor, 2.9 gigahertz, 16 gig of RAM, and 2 meg cache on the chip. So let's go get our all of our settings set. Let's see, don't need that. Quick booting, I don't like that enabled. The internal graphics adapter. See, CPU features, those look good. Chipset, those look okay. Boot sequence, I don't have the USB key in there right now, so it's not going to see it. Don't need trusted computing. Integrated peripherals. Okay, we want the USB, we want the LAN, we don't want the FireWire, we're not going to be using it. We don't need the audio, so we'll disable that. Serial ATA, it's set up for HCI, so that's good. You need to have that set to HCI for Windows operating systems beyond version 7. I/O devices, COM port, let's disable that. We don't need a COM port. Escape, come back out. Power management, I'm not going to worry about. Hardware monitor, not going to worry about. Green power, I'm not going to worry about. So we'll go ahead and save and exit the setup here, and it will reboot. All right, so here we are back at the PC that's going to serve as our Windows Server 2016 server, and I'm going to choose to boot off the USB key and hit enter and escape and press the space bar. And so we should be able to boot. So make sure your BIOS settings are correct. Make sure you got hardware that is compatible with Windows Server 2016. I apologize for the light on this side and this side because I've got my, even though I have my blinds closed, they're still imparting some light onto the monitors from the side. I apologize for that. It should be gone here pretty quickly. Now, the first thing I'm going to do once I come up is I've got to enter my information, and we're going to actually format the drive that's in here. It's got Windows 7 on it now. So I'm going to pick my language, my time, and my keyboard and click next. I'm going to choose install now. Now, on any of the Windows Server products, I always do a custom install. It's just the way I've always done it. So when that screen comes up, that's what we will choose. Now, I am not going to enter the product key right now. I'm going to just tell it I don't have a product key. I'm going to choose Windows Server 2016 Standard Desktop Experience. Now, if I choose 2016, there's no GUI. So I like the GUI. I'm going to choose Desktop Experience. I could choose Data Center or the Data Center Desktop Experience, whichever. But we're just going to do a standard Windows Server 2016. I'm going to accept the license terms, and I'm going to do a custom install. And you can see right now I have two partitions on this drive. I'm going to go ahead and simply delete both of them. And I'm going to split this drive up. I'm going to do about a 200 gigabyte partition for Windows Server. That's fine. And then I'll leave the remainder of the drive for virtual machines so I can put some data on them. Now, if you're doing this in a real world environment and you're going to use Hyper-V, I would strongly recommend you have, if you're going to have a spinning drive, make that be your primary boot drive, and then get yourself a 500 gig SSD drive to put your virtual machines on. They're going to be much faster. It's kind of redundant on this machine because the best interface we have is a serial ATA2. So in this case, I'm just going to split up the drive, give 200 gig to the operating system and the remaining 270 gig to virtual machines. And so I'm going to click on next, and we're going to let it install. And we will come back once the install is completed. Alright, so now the install is completed. So now we need to enter a password for our administrative user. Enter my super secret password. And click on finish. And you probably noticed it hadn't set up the video card drivers or anything like that. Now, we'll see how much of this is similar to Windows Server 2012 when it finally decides to come up on the screen. We'll see, oh, it's more Windows 10 like. Go figure. So let's go ahead and let's log in. Now, what I'm going to do after we get logged in and I figure out how to get around is I'm going to join this to my existing domain, and then we'll resume the setup on my regular desktop machine using remote desktop. But we have to get to that point. This is pretty much the standard setup I do on all my servers. I get the core operating system loaded, get the network drivers loaded, all that good stuff, get it configured, and then I go to my machine across the way and get it set up. Now you notice it's noticed that I already have a domain network set up, and I'm going to tell it yes. This is all. It really doesn't matter. You should normally tell that no unless you have a home network or a business network you want to connect it to. So it looks like everything's up and running. I don't think the time zone is correct. Let's click on here and just find out. Date and time settings. Server Manager, of course, is going to come up. I hate Server Manager, but that's another story for another time. Let's see. Now it's got the wrong time zone, so let's set that up correctly. We're Central Time. And adjust for daylight savings time automatically, and it should have changed our time now. So I'm going to use Server Manager just because it came up. But the first thing I want to do, let's see if I can go to Display Settings and get that set up correctly. Go to Advanced. And there we go. So we'll keep those changes. So the native driver is okay. Now let's go to Windows Server Manager. And I'm going to come here to local server because that's going to give us a lot of information. Now, right now it's being assigned a DHCP address. You can see the name is wrong, the workgroup is wrong. Let's see. Yeah, it looks just like Windows Server 2012. Go figure. IPv4 address assigned by DHCP, but we're going to change that. It's calling that adapter Ethernet 2, and I assume it's calling the Ethernet adapter the Intel Ethernet adapter just Ethernet. So let's do a few things. Let's first of all, I'm going to come down here to this icon where the network is located. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to go Open Network and Sharing Center. And what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename these Ethernet adapters, and we'll call this the Realtek. And then we'll call this one the Intel. That way I just know by glancing that it's an Intel NIC, even though it tells you there it's an Intel Pro 1000 and it tells you it's a Realtek. I just like them in there, and you'll see why here in a minute. If I close these and then refresh this view, it should now tell me the Intel is not connected and the Realtek is IPv4 assigned by DHCP. Now, what I want to do is, normally I have a list of IP addresses that I can use. I have an IP address in mind that I want to use, but I'm going to look for a command prompt here. I think we're going to set this up with 9. Yeah, I don't have 9 assigned to anything, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to leave that minimized. So I'm going to go here to the Realtek and click on that, and then come over here to Properties. Whoops, sorry, didn't want to do that. Come over here to Properties, and we're going to enter a IP address manually, 192.168.5.9. Should fill in my subnet mask automatically. Our gateway is 5.254. Our DNS server is 5.1, and we'll use Google as an alternate. Alright. Okay, and yes. And then let's refresh the screen, and it should show 5.9 IPv6 enabled. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to call this something else. So I'm going to click on the computer name, come here. You don't put it in here, this is a description. You click on the change button, and we're going to call this MCS HV. We're going to call it HV3, Hypervisor 3. Click on OK. And it's telling me, hey, you got to restart. So let's go ahead and restart now, and we'll come back when it's restarted. Alright, so now we've rebooted, and it's coming back up to the desktop and bringing up my most beloved server manager. We'll wait for that to come up, and it should, once I go to local server. You know, I don't like server manager, the screen, because I'm old school. I'm used to doing it the old way, but that's okay. We'll be just fine. I'm going to readjust my camera here so we get a little bit better view, and move it in just a wee bit closer, so bear with me. Hopefully you can see everything on the screen. So now it's got the correct name, it's got the correct IP address, it's got the correct time zone. It's an AMD Athlon 2 X4 635, 15.75 gig of RAM, because part of that is used for the video card, total disk space, etc. So now what I want to do is I want to join this to the to my Active Directory domain, so that I can enable remote desktop on it and finish configuring it from across the room, and so that you can see it using OBS screen capture. So I'm going to click here on Workgroup, and again I'm going to go to Change, and I'm going to go and join my local domain, mcs.local. Okay, it should prompt me for a username, administrative username, and my super secret password. Click OK. Now keep in mind, I have never laid fingers on Windows Server 2016 before, but if it's anything like Windows Server 2012, it works the same way. And Windows Server 2008 R2 works the same way too, except it doesn't have this lovely little server manager. And of course, thank you Microsoft, I need to reboot again. So I'll go ahead and restart, and we'll come back after that's restarted. Alright, so we have now rebooted. We're back up to the login screen. So I'll hit Control Delete. Now we need to do something differently this time, because now it's joined to the domain. So I want to come down here and choose Other User. And I want to enter my domain in first, and then a backslash, and then my domain admin name, and of course my super secret password. Now this time it boots up, it should take a little bit longer because it has to apply the group policies to the desktop and to the registry, so we may have a blank screen for a minute or so here as it sets everything up. And there we go. Now, I understand Microsoft wants a unified desktop experience, but I believe the server should be minimalist desktop environment. I never or hardly ever connect to the internet from a server, etc. So why they even bother to install Edge on here is beyond me, but they do, and it is what it is. So let's go back to the local server, and we'll see if it's now got everything set in there correctly. Takes a minute to come up. Keep in mind this is a serial ATA2 interface with spinning hard drives, so it's nowhere near as fast as an SSD would be, but we got what we got. So I've got my name in there, Hypervisor 3, it's a member of the domain, it's Windows Firewall for domain is on, I'm going to turn that off. Remote management is enabled, but remote desktop is disabled. So I'm going to come here to remote desktop now, and I'm going to allow remote desktop connections. It's warning me about the firewall. It's going to enable exceptions for you automatically. And if I go to select users, Adama should already be there, and he is. Okay, apply, okay. Now let's refresh our screen here. And we now see the remote desktop is enabled. Now the first thing I'm going to do, and you'll have people out there telling you, don't ever do this. Okay. If you want your life to be miserable, go ahead and keep the Windows Firewall on. I'm turning mine off on domain networks because I have a perimeter firewall, and I know the reasons for the people say to leave it on, but I'm not doing it. It makes my life too much harder. I have a lot of software that goes out there and pulls Windows servers, and it's really complicated to set it up through the firewall, so I make my life as easy as I can. So now you see once we refreshed right here, now the domain firewall is off, remote management is enabled, and remote desktop is enabled. So now I should be able to connect to this remotely. And now it also tells you the product is not activated. So if I click on here, it's going to ask me for the product key. I think it'll run about 7 days without a product key. If you download the trial version of Windows Server 2016, I believe it runs for 180 days. At least that's what Server 2012 R2 did. It would run for 180 days, and then you could reactivate it one more time for a total of 360 days. So you could, in effect, evaluate Windows Server 2012 R2 for a period of 1 year without buying a license. Now, I don't know that they've done that with Server 2012 because I'm a Microsoft partner, so I get their partner keys, but I'm not going to activate mine yet. Now there's another thing I want to do. I'm going to minimize this server manager, and I'm going to come here to the Windows button, and the first thing I'm going to do, if I can find it, is I'm going to go to File Explorer, and then I am going to right click on this PC and go to Properties, and I just want to make sure, yes, I want to go to Device Manager and make sure I don't have any little exclamation points next to any devices, and I don't. So it sees my hard drives, it sees my display adapter, Microsoft Basic Display Adapter, that's fine. It sees my network adapters, it sees my processors, it sees my USB controllers. Alright, let's bring up Task Manager and see what it has to say about my processors. Go to Performance. I want to see my logical processors. I should have 4. I do. You can see they're not even running at full speed. That's another thing about Windows Server. Since 2012 R2, I believe, if the processors support it, Windows supports throttling the processor power as it's needed. So when this server is on full board, hosting a lot of virtualized machines, it'll run up to the maximum speed. Right now it's just keeping it at speed it needs it to. 2 megabit level 2 cache. My RAM looks good. I'm only using, and when people say look, people love to say, don't run a GUI on a server. Why you run a GUI on a server? Because I like a GUI. It makes my life easier, okay? RAM is cheap. I mean, seriously, people, really? You know, you Linux guys, I love a Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, but I hate the command line. I first learned computers with DOS, okay? So I'm done with the command line. I like the GUI. Now, the command line has its uses, but for those of you out there that say you should never run a GUI on a server, kiss my holy hot ass, because I'm going to run a GUI. And look, even with the GUI running, it's only consuming 1.1 gig of RAM. I can spare 1.1 gig of RAM. And actually, this will go down as we get the operating system tweaked. Now, you can see the RAM is only running at 667 megahertz, but that's okay. This is an older motherboard. But for those of you anti-GUI people, just shut up. I mean, really? Come on. If you don't like a GUI, fine, but don't preach to the rest of the world that our true server doesn't use a GUI, because it does. It just makes my life a whole lot easier. I want to check one more thing. Let's just see if we can go out to the internet, and I doubt we will be able to because it's going to pop up the little security warning. Yeah, it's enabled, but let's see if I can go to, let's go to Google, or let's go to Microsoft, if it'll go. It will close that, close that. Okay, yeah, I know. It's dangerous to go to the internet. There it is. So I now have internet connectivity as well, okay? And I got a little notice down here probably, yeah, turn on Windows Smart Screen. We'll come back to that. Okay, so now what I want to do is go over to back to my regular desktop, my Windows 10 desktop, and let's see if we can connect to this server remotely and finish getting it set up. Alright, so we're back at the desktop, and I need to make a change here. We want to connect to MCS-HV3. And let's click on Connect. And we need to enter our domain, username, and our super secret password. And then let me drag this over here, and there we are. There's MCS Hypervisor 3. We are now in a remote desktop session. So we have had some wonderful, wonderful success. We've got it up and running. Time all told to that, to make from making the USB to installing the operating system, was right about an hour to do that. And let's go on to our next step. So let's go over Server Manager here real quick. Okay, let me clarify something. I say I don't like Server Manager. It has its uses. But if you don't like it coming up every time you log on to Windows Server, if you simply come over here to Manage, Server Manager Properties, you can tell it right here, do not start Server Manager automatically at logon. Okay. You can also set the refresh period. I like to set that to about 5 minutes. And I'm going to click on OK. And what the refresh is this little button right here. So I'm not going to do any updates. The next thing I want to do is I want to go out and I want to format that partition for the rest of the hard drive. And what I do to do that is I come up here to Tools and Computer Management. And then once Computer Management comes up, come down here to Disk Management. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this drive letter. This is my USB drive. I haven't removed it, so I'm just gonna give it drive letter U for now, and we'll ignore this message. Okay, and I'm going to come out here. I'm going to right click on the unallocated portion, do a new simple volume. Click Next. I'm going to give it the full capacity. I'm going to give it drive letter D, and I'm going to call this Data Volume 1 and perform a quick format. And I'm using NTFS, and I'm going to let it choose the allocation unit size automatically, or default. And Next, and Finish. And then we should have a healthy partition and a D drive, and we do. So I'm going to close that. And if we come to File Explorer, you'll see we now have a blank D drive. All right. So let's just go over everything else. Domain firewalls off, remote management enabled, NIC teaming disabled. The Intel NIC is not connected. You see why I renamed them now? So I can just look up there and see what they are. The last installed updates, never. We're going to do updates last. The time zone is set correct. Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration is on. So what that does is it keeps you basically from going anywhere on the internet without a warning sign. I don't recommend, yeah, I'm about to view it over a secure connection. That's fine. You see these little content, see it's being blocked by internet because blah, blah, blah. Continue to prompt website contact is blocked. Okay. So what they want you to do is add all the websites you go to an approved list of websites when this setting is on. Now, let me show you what happens when I turn it off. And I don't recommend this, but if you're working on if you're working on a server and you need unfettered internet access from that server for whatever reason, which I also don't recommend, you can turn this off temporarily to get around it. So I'm going to turn it off for administrators, tell it okay. I'm going to refresh this screen and you'll see now that it's off. And now I'm going to launch Internet Explorer again. And it tells me it's turned off. So I'm going to tell it do not show. And then I'm going to go right back to Google, and it should just go right to Google this time. So that's what this setting here does. Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration. So I'm going to turn that back on and leave it on. And it's back on again. Now I'm getting a little notification up here. What's that? Okay, it's just telling me it refreshes servers. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable Hyper-V on this. And hopefully I've set my BIOS correctly. I believe I set up virtualization. I believe this CPU will support virtualization. So we're about to find out. So let's switch to the monitor. We're going to go to Manage. And we're going to add roles and features. Okay, we're going to read this. Next, we're going to do a role-based feature or feature-based installation. Next, we're going to install it on this server. And we're going to do Hyper-V. All right? And so it tells you it's going to do all of this stuff for Hyper-V. So I'm going to add the features. Next, and it's telling me it needs to install, or it's going to install any additional tools that it might need. Okay, before you install this row, you should identify which network connections to the server you want to use for setup for virtual switches. And then after you've set it up and you can configure the Hyper-V switches as well on your virtual machines. So next, I'm going to use the Realtek as my primary switch, virtual switch. I want to allow this server to send and receive live migrations of virtual machines. This is something new, not in Server 2016, but it's new in Hyper-V from Server 2012 R2 and above, and I always recommend you allow this. This way you can migrate machines between Hyper-V machines. You don't need any special tools or any additional software anymore. Microsoft did this to compete with VMware, and it was a very smart move because now I can move virtual machines without having to do an export and then an import like you saw on my virtual machine setup video. So we'll click Next. And now here's where I want to change this to the D drive. So it's asking default location for virtual hard disk files. So I'm going to browse to the D drive right here. And I'm going to make a new folder. And I'll call that VHD for virtual hard drives and tell it OK. And my virtual machine configuration files, I want those on the D drive as well. So I'll choose and I'll call it virtual machines. Now this is how I set mine up. Your mileage may vary. Next, and install. And we'll let this run. It's going to take a few minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll see if we were successful. All right, so Windows Server is telling us now it's a restart is pending. So we need to close this. And then if we click here, it tells us we need to restart to finish the installation. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this server. if Server Manager ever closes. Now, if I come down here and go to Start and come here, oh my God, they've given back the option to restart in a virtual machine. Okay, and I'm going to give it a reason as operating system reconfiguration planned, and continue. Now when you do that, what it does is it creates an entry in the log file that so you can go back and look and see why the server was rebooted. So I've just gotten in the habit over the years of making sure I choose the right reason, so that if I go look at the event log later and see that the server was rebooted, I want to know why. So I always put a reason in there. You could just choose other if you wanted to. And we'll come back when the server's rebooted, and cut. And you can see it rebooting behind me right now. Okay, so now our server has rebooted and we have relogged in, and it should come up to the desktop, and it will not bring up Server Manager now, and you can see all is well with the world. So now they used to have a link down here for Server Manager. I guess they don't anymore. I can put it on there. I just come right here, and there's Server Manager right there. So we'll click on that, bring it back up, and we should now be able to see the Hyper-V service is loaded and working, hopefully. Okay. Well, Hyper-V loaded without any errors, so I'm assuming that I set up the BIOS correctly. Let's see if we can do actually, let's just click here and do we'll do a search for Hyper-V Manager. There it is. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to pin to the taskbar down here. Okay, and let's minimize Server Manager and come here to Hyper-V Manager. Alright, so there we go. Hyper-V Manager is indeed set up. And looky there, it's waiting for me to create some virtual machines. Okay, so I'm going to right click on this and go to where am I going? Hyper-V settings right here. And you remember earlier when it asked us where we wanted to store the VHDs. So if you want to change this after you've installed Hyper-V, that's fine. You just right click on it, go to the Hyper-V settings, and you can tell it where to put your virtual hard drives and your virtual machines. Also, physical GPUs. Morton Hjorth at My Playhouse. This is something you want to look into, because you can do physical GPU pass-through, which is something I know you've wanted to do on virtual machines, and you've had some videos up on your channel about that. So it does allow you to do physical GPU pass-through for remote FX and GPU management. You also have your settings here for live migrations, storage migrations, etc. Keyboard, mouse release key, all those are programmable. I want to cancel on here. Now if we right click and go to Virtual Switch Manager, we should see our virtual switches in there. And I'm just going to rename this, and I'm going to call it Subnet 5, because that's what I call all my virtual switches on my network, because I'm using this 5 subnet. So I just do that for my own personal preference on Windows Server. So now I have a fully functioning Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V server set up and running. But wait, there's more. The beauty of Windows over VMware is that not only can this be a Hyper-V server, but I could load DNS on here if I wanted to. I could load the DHCP server on here. I can load file serving on here. I can load any number of utilities and applications I need. And Windows will manage all of them seamlessly. Don't let anyone tell you that you cannot run Windows with all of these add-on features. Windows used to make a product called Small Business Server. And in Small Business Server, they crammed the Active Directory Domain Controller, DNS, DHCP, Windows SharePoint, Microsoft Exchange, and had a full GUI to manage it. And as long as you had enough memory and CPU power, you were fine. So what's good enough for Microsoft is good enough for me. So if you wanted this server not only to be your Hyper-V server, you could also make it your file server. You could make it a backup DNS, secondary DNS, DHCP. You could run your Plex media server on it. You could do whatever you wanted to take full advantage of those processors. So if you're in a lab environment and you need really powerful stuff, and let me point out something. If I was using VMware, that's all it could be. It could only be a virtual machine server. I can't run file sharing services on there. I can't run DNS services on there. I could create a virtual machine running those services, but I couldn't run them natively on the operating system. And to me, that's why I choose Microsoft over VMware. Not that VMware isn't a good product, and frankly, I'll make the final decision based on this version of Hyper-V. But running Linux machines, I never had a single problem with Hyper-V 2012 R2. And I assume I'm not going to have any with Server 2016 either. Now, the big one is I want to try and set up a Hackintosh virtual machine. Why? Because I just want to see if I can get it to work. I doubt that I'm going to have any success because this is an underlying AMD processor. But when my new Dell comes in, when my refurbished Dell comes in, we'll try it on there. But that is the beauty of running a Microsoft server as opposed to VMware. And, a lot of people say, well, VMware also has a free edition of ESXi. Yes, they do, and so does Microsoft. If I had downloaded and installed the non-GUI version, just the Hyper-V version of Windows Server 2016, it would have been free, as in gratis. The only thing it will run is Hyper-V virtual machines, and it doesn't have a GUI, but you can run the GUI on your workstation and not have any problems with having a GUI interface. So keep that in mind when choosing between Microsoft and VMware. So now what I want to do is I want to further cover what I do when I create a Hyper-V machine, so you can just see what my steps are. So I'm going to minimize Server Manager, and I'm going to come here to File Explorer. And what I want to do is go to my D drive here, and I want to create another folder. So I'm just going to right click and do New Folder, and I'm going to create a folder called ISO. Okay, this is similar to VMware ESXi, where you create an upload folder or a download folder. So I created that folder called ISO. Now I'm going to go to the network, and I'm going to find my SAN, and I'm going to go to my apps folder, which is where I keep all of my ISO files, and I keep them under a folder called Microsoft Partner Downloads. So I have ISOs of all my operating systems in here, including Server 2016. But what I like to do is copy any ISOs I might need. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to create one for Windows 10 Enterprise and copy that over. So we'll do that now. So I right click, choose copy, come here to my D drive, go to my ISO, and paste it there. And you can see I'm getting really good network speeds. Now hopefully this won't interfere with my recording of OBS Studio and cause it to glitch, because sometimes when I saturate that network connection, it will glitch the video. But we'll let it finish copying. Do 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 do. The other one I'm going to copy over there is a Windows 7 ISO 64-bit, because I also want to create or have the ability to create Windows Server or Windows 7 operating system. So I'll go back to Apps and go back to my Partner Downloads. And let's do Windows 7, and I think I have a 64-bit. Yeah, I have a Pro. And we'll right click, we'll copy, and paste that over to my ISO files folder. And we'll come back when that's done. Alright, so I've copied my Windows 10 Enterprise, Windows 7 Pro, 64-bit, my Windows Server 2012 R2, and my Windows Server 2016 ISO all over to my new Hypervisor 3 machine running Windows Server 2016. And I've managed to do all of this in about a course of about an hour and a half, and not including the build of the machine, which was already built. Now let's talk a minute about Windows ISOs, because I want to share a little trick with you you maybe don't know. Some of you may be saying, well, that's fine and dandy, but what if I want to install a different version of Windows 10 or Windows 7 or Windows Server, like the data center version or the ultimate version of Windows 7 or the home version of Windows 7? Well, what Microsoft doesn't tell you, unless you're a partner, is that these ISOs contain all of those operating systems. In other words, if I choose the Windows 7 Pro 64-bit, I can install Windows Home, Windows Home Pro, Windows 7 Ultimate, and Pro off of one ISO. There is a file under those ISOs that all you have to do is flip a switch on, the ei.cfg file, and it will give you the option to, off of one ISO, install all versions of that version of Windows. So you don't have to go out there and download 4 different versions of Windows 7. All you have to do is do a Google search on ei.cfg. In fact, let's do it live. Let's just give it a try right now and see if we can't. If I can't show you, ei.cfg, I believe is the name of it. Let's go to the one for Windows 10. Yes. So all you have to do, and even, they do have it on TechNet now. Well, looky there, right there. So all you have to do is create a file, the ei.cfg file, and pop that into your ISO, and then you will have the option to install any version of Windows 10. You can even inject the product key into that, and have any version of Windows 8, 8.1, Windows Server 2012, 2012 R2. I don't know that you can still do it for Windows 10, but it looks like there's several articles out here that allow you to change, and there is a utility out there that will change the ei.cfg file so that you don't have to take the ISO and uncompress it and put the file in manually. This program, if I can find it, I'll put a link in the notes below, will go out to the ISO and actually create this ei.cfg file based on what version of Windows you're using. And we'll do it for you automatically, so you don't have to decompress the ISO, create the file, and then recompress it into an ISO. It saves you a few steps. So do a lookup on ei.cfg like I just did, and you will find that it will make your life quite a bit easier if you're dealing with a lab environment and multiple versions of Windows 7, 8, or 10, or even Server for that matter. So there we go, boys and girls, ladies and gents. In the course of about an hour and a half, well, actually less, this video I hope is under 45 minutes. We'll see when we get to editing. I managed to create a Windows Server 2016 on a physical hard drive, or a physical machine, bare metal as they say, and it's now ready to take on virtual machines that I decide or deem worthy to put on there. Now, I've already done a video on virtualization for a client I had, and hopefully you found that entertaining. I will be willing to do another one with Windows 10 to show you how to create virtual machines under Windows 10. We could do one on Windows Server 2012 R2, Windows Server 2016 for that matter, but I need to know what you want to see. So hopefully you found this video entertaining and you found it informative. Please give us a like down below and subscribe and tell your friends about this channel. And hopefully the next video you'll see is the continuing vlog series on the house repairs. And then, as promised, as soon as I get my antenna back up in the air, I will be doing a video on my Plex media server setup and how to set it up with a beta version to record live TV. So, thanks for watching. I appreciate all your comments, I appreciate all your likes, and I appreciate all your subscriptions. And we'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye.